Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Invasive Species Center webinar series. My name is Katie Church, and I am the Aquatic Invasive Plant Coordinator, and I also coordinate the e-commerce or Don't Let It Loose program at the Invasive Species Center. And I will be your moderator for today. I just want to confirm that everyone can see my screen here. Oh, and it says I'm not sharing. Okay. Let me Okay. So, before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge that the Invasive Species Center honors the long history of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation peoples on the land now known as Canada and strives to show respect to their ancestors, their community, and to them individually. We greatly appreciate the significance of the lands, waters, and all living things and offer our gratitude to Indigenous people for their care and teachings about our earth. Our relationships with Indigenous communities are important, and we will continue to listen and learn how we can be in good relationships with Indigenous peoples, the lands and waters, and all living things, and act accordingly. The Invasive Species Center respectfully acknowledges that our head office is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, the Batchewana, and the Garden River First Nations, as well as the longtime settlement of the Métis people in the Robinson-Huron Treaty area. The Invasive Species Center is a not-for-profit organization that connects stakeholders' knowledge and technology to prevent the introduction and the spread of invasive species that harm Canada's environment, economy, and society. And we've got lots of great invasive species resources on our website, including species profiles, best management practices. So check us out at invasivespeciescenter.ca. You can also sign up on our homepage for our newsletter, the biweekly media scan, and event invitations, which is where you can hear about the upcoming webinars. The ISC has launched the Invasive Species Training Program, which offers virtual courses on topics related to invasive species. We currently have 4 courses available, which focus on different forest invasive and marbled crayfish. But we will be releasing new content regularly, so stay tuned for that, and make sure to check out our website and sign up to receive updates on when these courses will become available. Just before we get started with today's webinar, there are a couple of things I would like to mention. There will be time for questions at the end of the webinar, so if you have questions for the speaker at any time, please type them in the question box, and I will read it out to the presenter after the webinar. We ask that you use the Q&A box, not the chat, for this purpose. Questions in the chat may go unanswered. If you're having technical difficulties at any time, please type them in the chat box or respond to the email found in your registration, and we will try to resolve it for you. We have also enabled closed captioning, so if you would like to follow along that way, you can turn that option on, the closed caption button on the bottom of your taskbar. Lastly, there will be a brief survey at the following the webinar. If you could take some time to fill it out, we would greatly appreciate it. So today's webinar is titled Beyond the Bowl, the Pet Trade and Aquatic Invasive Species in Canada. And I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Kate Fredericks. Kate is a recent Master's of Science graduate from the University of Toronto and holds a Bachelor's of Science from Dalhousie University. She's an aquarium hobbyist of 10 plus years and is interested in the interface between the pet trade and the aquatic invasive species spread. Her research focuses on the overwintering of invasive goldfish and the human dimensions of goldfish invasion. So thank you, Kate, for joining us, and I will pass it over to you. I can stop sharing my screen here.
Can everyone see this okay?
Yep, we can see it.
There we go. Okay. Thank you, Katie, and thank you all for joining me this morning. Today, I will be presenting some of the fascinating history of traded ornamental fish to hopefully contextualize the success of invasive pets in Canada and have some fun along the way. So I'll begin by introducing some background on the aquarium trade and invasions of traded aquatic species in Canada. I will then delve into some drivers of these invasions, as well as how and why these fish may be able to persist in Canada, again informed by some history. So recently, some of the most problematic aquatic invasive species have been introduced in North America through the aquatic pet pathway. Around 100 species of ornamental fishes have been introduced in North American waters via the aquarium trade, of which up to 40 have established populations with ensuing ecological and economic damages therein. And even globally, invasive species are strongly overrepresented in the fish trade, where invasive species have greater commercial success than their non-invasive traded counterparts, which I'll get into as the presentation continues. A primary pathway of fish invasion is from bowl to watershed, otherwise known as pet release. So over 10% of households in North America reportedly own ornamental fish. And in Canada, it's estimated that 2% of these fish owners resort to releasing unwanted animals into the wild. I think a few of you may be here because me and my colleagues in the Mandrake Lab are conducting a more recent survey of Canadian aquarium owners, which I don't have data for yet, but maybe next time. So some of the most common pet-traded invasive species in Canada may be familiar to some of you. They include the red-eared slider, marbled crayfish, a fairly new invasive species in Ontario, the rusty crayfish, rosy red minnow, Chinese mystery snail, and probably the most famous, the goldfish. So together, these species highlight the scope of pet-mediated invasions, but to understand the pathway in detail, I'm going to focus on one poster child species, the goldfish, because its history from 200 AD to the present connects cultural symbolism, commercialization, and modern release behavior necessary to contextualize our growing pet. Surprisingly or unsurprisingly, goldfish are one of the oldest traded fish species globally. They were the first ornamental fish successfully bred in China, which ultimately kickstarted the entire ornamental fish trade. In early China, goldfish were valued for their spiritual significance and aesthetics. So they were intentionally stocked in home water gardens, and their undulating movement was believed to symbolize harmony and mindfulness, and gold scales were believed to attract wealth and good fortune to the home. Shortly after their cultivation success in Asia, goldfish were introduced to Europe in the 1600s. The first official report of goldfish import was recorded in Portugal in 1611, and they later showed up in England and France. And these original fishes imported to Europe were praised for their exoticism, and aristocrats were very eager to get a hold of some. So some of the first tropical fishes in Europe were sold for the equivalent of 3,000 to 6,000 pounds per breeding pair in today's value. And if you were a goldfish in the early 1700s, you would have likely ended up as elite ornamental spectacles. Goldfish were relatively rare, as I mentioned, and expensive. And bowls and tanks ranged anywhere from 400 to 10,000 pounds in today's value. In particular, these gold and silver fish were noted in records at elite locations such as pleasure gardens throughout London, which attracted English royals and aristocrats alike. So history up to this point reveals a poignant release driver that's still pertinent today. And the valuation of goldfish for their symbolism of wealth and aesthetics ultimately contributed towards intentional stocking of goldfish in Asia and Europe in water bodies throughout the 1700s. As breeding techniques advanced, goldfish became available for public purchase at prices equivalent to around $1 a pound a dozen. And glass globes for the display of goldfish really came on the scene in this era, and they were recommended for the species to better reflect and magnify their shiny scales. And almost ironically or counterintuitively, pet stores at the time recommended using sewer and River Thames water in London to fill bowls, as this was thought to nourish the goldfish and also minimize feeding costs. Also, this is where we see goldfish street sales on the rise. So goldfish street salesmen, known as goldfish hawkers, regularly went door to door selling the fish. Upon entrance to the house, they would often call for the children of the home in hopes that they would be awestruck by the golden scales in the fishbowl. And they often had better success going door to door and selling these goldfish in the streets just due to convenience. This supposed marketing to children worked as goldfish became popular pets for children throughout England, and British varieties of the goldfish also began to pop up and were bred for the market. In this slide, I have a picture of the London Shubunkin, which is one of the most notorious goldfish bred in the UK at the time. And we can see goldfish commonly included in child portraits also and artworks of the time. And we also begin to see goldfish included in children's stories and wives' tales as well. So the association between pet fish and children would later become troublesome, and the early onset kind of connotations between childhood and goldfish are a primary reason for why goldfish get moralized or seen as innocent, harmless little pets. In many ways today, we can't fathom that our little childhood pets could evoke ecological harm, and we may even justify release with this thinking or thinking of it as a positive act. And this idea became prevalent in Canada as well. Around this time, post 1850-ish, I don't have an exact date, goldfish landed in Canada, where they were further cemented as common household pets, and they began to be mass-produced in North America. In Canada, we also know that they were assigned positive connotations initially, for their role in ridding pest mosquitoes in intentional stalking efforts in Winnipeg, as well as in the United States, like California. In fact, Canada was one of the top goldfish exporting countries. The Goldfish Supply Company out of Stouffville, Ontario, sold around 12 million goldfish annually and even supplied select varieties to Winston Churchill and the royal family at Buckingham Palace. And I got lucky. I was able to find some of the only photos of the farm in old newspaper clippings in my preparation for this talk. In fact, goldfish became so popular and mass-produced in Canada that they were even sold at drugstores and flower shops in addition to pet stores. And they were also commonly given away for free at major department stores and at carnival games. And again, this preempted one particularly notorious release driver, which is accessibility. As owners may place less value on low-cost, highly accessible pets, and therefore be more likely to release them when care becomes costly or inconvenient. This motivator is further accentuated by consumer miseducation. I think this is particularly a pain point in the aquarium community, seeing how sometimes big box retailers promote and market pets, specifically fish, but mismatches between the perceived and actual level of care needed to maintain a fish in captivity may in turn drive releases. And again, this is highly relatable to many people in aquaria or even fishery science. The actual level of care needed to keep fishes was and is made very difficult to understand. So here I show that some companies will use buzzwords like easy care or even beginner level fish that could misinform consumers. And you can imagine my surprise when I first started out in aquaria as a kid and woke up one morning to find tens of baby snails and fry in my tank. And for many Canadians, this is a reality omitted from pet education and could also facilitate release. Again, if tanks become overstocked, owners overwhelmed, or the cost builds up over time, having this many. So now that we know a little bit about how human relationships with species throughout history inform release motivators, we might ask, why might pet fish be disproportionately successful as invasive species? Another interesting point back in history, in the 17 and 1800s, ornamental fish were transported between countries on ships in this metal can, or these types of metal cans that's pictured on the slide. And the problem is the cans didn't have aeration, food, heating, or filtration that tropical fish require. And we as humans tried to get around this by limiting ornamental fish shipments to warm seasons to control for temperature fluctuations or shocks. And it was also common for merchant ships to hire crew, specifically for the purpose to use foot air pumps to aerate the hundreds of cans on a single ship. But as you can very well imagine, this was not sustainable and often did not work out in the fish's benefit. Ultimately, many families of fish just could not withstand transport, and in many ways, shipment acted as a filter for families of fish with broad environmental uses. And the limitations of early aquaria technology partially contributes to why the current fish trade today is overwhelmingly dominated by just 10 families out of 67. For instance, labyrinth fishes, such as gouramis, who periodically visit the surface for air, dominated early shipments because they were able to survive long oceanic transport, again, due to their ability to breathe atmospheric oxygen. And goldfish were also favored by merchants as they could subsist with no feed or upkeep for weeks on end. Again, relating back to sewer water fact earlier, the idea of animalcules and food inherently in water was used as justification to not feed fish on early voyages. And this preference for fish with transport-worthy traits is especially evident in ornamental fish export data over time. In the early 1900s, specifically 1918, more than 98% of fish species transported had the ability to absorb ambient oxygen, indicated by the dark gray donuts in the figure. And this statistic highlights the limitations of fish trade imposed by transportation and also human efforts to circumvent fish loss by selecting hardy species for the trade itself. Not only did species that tolerate transport conditions become overrepresented in the pet trade, but transport filtered for stress-tolerant phenotypes at the individual level, which could have aided post-release persistence if a fish were to become released. For instance, individual survivors likely had higher than average tolerance to crowding, low oxygen, thermal stress, starvation, and even disease in these cramped transportation conditions. And of course, this wouldn't be a Canadiana talk without some mention of winter. The low temperature resistance of goldfish, as displayed in early fish transport, proved important to survive Canadian winters. And counter to common ideas, goldfish can and do survive winters in Canada. We know from newspaper clippings that Goldfish Supply Company, the pond-reared goldfish were brought into barns in the winter, and several community fountains and ponds, specifically in Manitoba, but also across Canada, were emptied out of fear that goldfish wouldn't survive. But as it happens, citizens made their own observations of the persistence and hardiness of goldfish. As many residents, including a woman in this article clipping from 1934, recounts that her goldfish bowl magically came back to life after being frozen solid, and many citizens also recounted their goldfish bowls miraculously coming back even when they left their bowl too close to the window or even outside. So in summary, historic valuations, commercialization, and the trade of fishes have shaped our modern relationships with pet traded species, as well as the distribution and biology of species themselves. And it's important to note that invasion risk emerges from the interaction between human-mediated pathways and biological traits that facilitate persistence. And as an aquarist, to truly understand why, what motivates release today, we must not overlook how pet ownership was shaped historically. And thank you all so much for attending my kooky but hopefully insightful talk this morning. I'm happy to take any questions or delve into the history of goldfish a little bit more.
All right, thank you so much, Kate. We do have a question, and please feel free to throw some more questions in the chat. This one is quite a large one, so I'm gonna read it out, but Kate, if you want to also look at it in the question and answer section. It's my understanding that rosy red minnows are the Lewis thick version of the native in Alberta fathead minnow. If possible, please comment on how a supposed Lewistic version of the native species may specifically impact an ecosystem in comparison to a species entirely non-native to a watershed. And then they just have a comment, perhaps introducing a parasite that are not originally found in the ecosystem, which disseminates native populations.
Yeah. So rosy red minnows are actually of keen interest to myself and one of my colleagues in the Mandrake lab. We do have a future research planned out for rosy reds, but I think the main concern is that potentially the pet traded domesticated fish could come in and breed with native fathead minnows. I did read some reports out of Arkansas that like 1/4 of the normal colored fathead minnows do have that rosy coloration. So it does seem like a typical Mendelian genetic trait, but I think the angle of looking at possible reproductive implications, offspring implications with breeding between the domesticated strains and our native fish populations would be really interesting in future. And you're right, it does need more research as there has been little research on the impacts of rosy red specifically.
Awesome. Okay, and then the next one is just a comment here. Excellent and interesting talk. Given the historic context and drivers of release, what do you think are the most important ways to frame the messaging to prevent release?
Well, I guess broadly, I would say first, we know that education is the foremost and most effective economically and to prevent releases. Education is the primary means by which we can prevent invasive species from entering Canadian water bodies. I do believe that there's such a huge opportunity for collaboration with aquarists in particular and the pet industry, which has been less so focused on historically. I mean, the original and most prevalent ways that fish were originally introduced in Canada was through ballast water. So the whole aquarium trade is a novel or a new pathway. And I really do believe, maybe I'm biased, but educating potential pet owners, novice pet owners, getting people actually engaged in the hobby through pet education is the foremost step I think we can take.
Yeah, agreed. Are there similar species that we should be concerned about or that have reports we have reports of? More of a horizon scanning question.
Yeah, it it's difficult in the most recent aquarium survey that the lab is conducting. I know there were a few records of the weather loach in there, which is particularly concerning, and they were found for the first time in the maritime provinces last year. So those guys, they are able to flop on land a bit and get from extremely close water bodies. So I would be careful for the weather loaches as well as snakeheads. Um, both of these species do have quite remarkable cold tolerance as well, um, just like fish.
Okay. And then I have another one here. What are aquarium owners thinking when they release? Is it a perceived sense of compassion, a perceived harmlessness? Yeah, just a question about that.
Yeah, I think it is different amongst releasers. I think the most common uh, thing I've heard from just talking to people at pet expos is that compassion. People don't want to euthanize their fish or they don't know how. Again, we view them as innocent and cute and all of these good things. But that leads a lot of people to uh, releasing their fish. And some people do think that it's, a positive um, thing. And throughout history, goldfish um, and their ecological impacts, specifically in mosquito control, have been framed positively. I also wanted to mention another quick fun fact. Um, but after the release of Finding Nemo, there was a lot of people who became more aware of the impacts of the fish trade, specifically on marine life. Um, and this kind of had some unintended consequences. There's a famous scene in Nemo where he's flushed down this drain at the dentist's office and wants to return to the wild. And this resonated with a lot of children wanting to release their pets into their uh, wild habitat. And I've even found some, again, newspaper articles reporting that multiple municipalities it was either the UK or Australia, but a bunch of parents were calling the water treatment plants requesting that they get their child's pet fish out of the water treatment plant because they had flushed their fish, wanting to return it to its natural system. So I think there is that symbolism as well, wanting to return the fish uh, back to the water.
That's very interesting. Um, And like just to comment on that, like the same with me, the pet shows that I have attended, a lot of comments are, they had no idea that this could be invasive or the impacts to have when releasing a goldfish or a red-eared slider. And I think it's really important that I think that education and outreach is a very important part of prevention. Okay, so we have a couple more questions here. Are there hotspots in Ontario? Where are these pet fish showing up? Small ponds, Great Lakes. Um, yeah, I
Yeah.
guess.
My research, which I didn't necessarily touch on in terms of overwintering, I focus on these stormwater management ponds in Ontario that were kind of erected to um, control flooding. They're in residential areas a lot, so they are accessible areas for goldfish release. They're usually monocultures of goldfish, but also in a lot of ecosystems, um, invasive species or invasive pets kind of play off of each other. So I recently read a paper looking at kind of the codependence of mystery snails and goldfish on each other, and they both were more successful when in the same sympatric environment than in different ponds. So they do, in a sense, kind of piggyback off each other, and sometimes we see that in larger water bodies, but I primarily focus on more the residential areas, which are stepping stone um, kind of sites for entry into the larger water bodies.
Okay. We have lots of questions coming through, but we also have lots of time, so this is great. Do you know about snakeheads? Are they being released by pet owners? They don't seem like a species that would be attractive as pets.
Yeah, I don't find them particularly attractive pets either. I don't know a lot about snakeheads. I know my supervisor or my previous supervisor Nick was very passionate about snakeheads. So in fear of miseducation, I can't comment more on the snakeheads, but I know they are particularly a concern in the US.
And they are listed as a prohibited species in Ontario under the Invasive Species Act. So just to
Yes,
plug that.
I did see one respondent answer of having a snakehead in the aquarium survey that's ongoing. So
Oh,
another
interesting.
warning sign. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, so for education and outreach, there are currently messaging around "Don't let it loose" being done. What do you think would be an effective approach to making sure that information is disseminated to the right targeted audience?
Yeah, I think that's that's something that even I've kind of struggled with targeting the right people, even for the survey that I was conducting on aquarium ownership. I think we tend to focus on aquarium clubs and getting the messaging out to really experienced aquarium hobbyists, but perhaps like the level of experience in aquaria um, correlates to whether you're more likely to release a pet or not. I know in the aquarium clubs that I've talked to, they're very passionate about educating their members on not releasing pets, and they do have take back programs within their clubs to minimize this issue. The I think if we could get access to more of the population that has a child with a 5 gallon tank for goldfish full, that may be more effective. But in terms of relaying that information, uh, I'd say finding the right target audience is even more difficult than just disseminating that information and portraying it well.
Agreed. Do we know what the distribution of wild goldfish is in Ontario or Canada?
By wild in like introduced.
I I want to say that's what they meant. Yes.
Yeah, there is a paper actually done by my colleague Melanie Massey and the lab at or Mandrake Lab called "The Rise of Goldfish in North America." It's free for public access, and there's a great um, schematic on there of just the distribution of goldfish over time and occurrence records in North America. So I don't have it on hand right now, but I would look there.
Awesome. Um, do you know how goldfish relate relative Prussian carp was introduced to Canada?
Um, I'm not sure. Obviously, Prussian carp with or no, yeah, I'm not sure on that one. My carp knowledge is specifically uh, goldfish, and that's pretty much all.
Okay, no problem. And then has there been any research directed at goldfish egg survival through sewage treatment facilities? That's an
No,
interesting one.
that is the question of the hour, and I may have some research in the works on that. But the egg survivorship in general is really interesting. We know that goldfish eggs can survive the gastrointestinal tract of waterfowl, so that's also a secondary spread um, mechanism, which is very scary, kind of like the cockroach of freshwater. I also have talked to a water treatment plant, and they do have the goldfish in their water treatment plants. One of them was named Flushy, and he was
Oh,
taken out of the grates in a water treatment plant and kept at the facility for years until he passed away. But that is definitely a really keen and interesting avenue for future research. And again, I think that kind of research more on the social side is what will get people really engaged and interested in these pet invasion issues like I was and am as a kid.
yeah. Just a question about pet rescue. So this is from Peter. Aside from euthanizing surplus pet fish, is there any pet rescue services available for fish?
Yeah, most the Canadian Association of Aquarium Clubs, they have um, local clubs around Canada. They readily take back um, unwanted fish and rehome them. Um, as well, oh, what was it? Um, some fish stores do also take back fish, not necessarily the big box ones. I think we rely a lot on the local retailers to take um, onus of that. And I do think that there could be more opportunities to make like invasive species smart certifications for certain stores to incentivize those take back programs. But I agree, and your question is really important because most people don't know where to give their unwanted fish. So, yeah, hopefully more locations in the future.
And there's just a comment. There are rehoming Facebook groups that they've seen as well. Okay. And then um, What do people in the commercial trade, like pet store owners, think about this issue? Are there cooperative partners in getting the message about AIS?
Um, I find the local retailers who I've talked to, specifically the one right near my house that I frequent a lot, I've talked to them multiple times about this, and again, they're very willing to do what they can within their um, time to help out. As for bigger box stores, that's more of a fuzzy area. Um, I mean, in a way, not providing or omitting some education from pet owners could increase uh, revenue if their fish keeps dying, having to buy more and more fish and more supplies as care costs potentially uh, increase. They have done a little bit to make some uh, information about the pets that they carry more available. I know one big box store does have guides. And when I was a kid, they used to say that a goldfish could grow to a maximum of 5 inches. But I noticed this year they increased the maximum size information to 10 inches. So I think that is an improvement and it is more transparent. But again, local retailers I find are better in that regard.
Okay, we have a couple more here. Um, what do you think is an effective way to remove invasive goldfish from water bodies, like ponds? They said they have primarily used electrofishing in an invaded pond.
Yeah, that's also a really important question. Um, from my research in winter, um, I'm looking specifically at, or I looked specifically at um, potential winter management strategies because we know that winter is one of the most vulnerable times for fishes. And so potentially this could be, more cost and time efficient to target them during a really weak and vulnerable period. Um, as as for specific management actions, I am not really sure, but um, from my research, I tend to suggest that the timing of the management action, specifically maybe during a weaker, physiologically a weaker period, may be um, as important as the mechanism of removal itself.
Okay, and then I think just to wrap things up here, what is your favorite fact about goldfish when doing outreach to youth or children to drive the message home about their invasiveness?
Oh, that's a good one. I do bring up the Finding Nemo fact frequently, um, as well as toilet fish, anything to do with toilets generally. It in the little information that I do have about goldfish and sewers and toilet systems, I generally bring those up. And again, such an interesting avenue for future research as well. So if goldfish can be found in the sewer, then I think we certainly do have a problem.
Hmm. Agreed. Well, I think I'm gonna stop it there. There are a couple more questions that are in the Q&A, and I'll give out your information so people can email you with them. Um, I'm just gonna share my screen here. Okay, so thank you again for presenting today, and thank you all for tuning in. This webinar was recorded and will be posted on our website, invasivespeciescenter.ca. Just a reminder to please take a couple minutes to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar. We would really appreciate it. And then just a reminder, the annual Invasive Species Center Forum will be held virtually on February 17th through the 19th. And we'll bring together researchers, practitioners, and all levels of government and community members across Canada and beyond. So really great opportunity to learn more. Thank you again, Kate. And like I said, I will put your email in the chat so people can email some questions. And yeah.